Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up, to do just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm Jono White, and I'm really excited for today's guest from the UK. It's always good to mix up the accents, so you're not just listening to my Aussie accent, but we have a great UK accent coming on with me, and it's Matthew Singleton. Matthew, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks, Jono. Thanks for inviting me.
I think, as always, it would be great initially. I'll ask you about your story in a second, but
you want to just give a bit of a, I guess, explain to people the role that you have in the organization and the type of work you do at the moment?
Yep, that's great. So currently I work for a company called OLR. We're a Oracle Gold partner. We're globally distributed in 7 locations. We do a mixture of retail, omni, and managed services and e-commerce. So in effect, we're retail focused, and we can do everything for that retail company. So literally from the point of sales in the physical store all the way through inventory to your website to analytics. We're quite specialized in that area. But my role within that company is I'm the COO, and I head up multiple departments: legal, HR, finance, and operations, from a governance and process point of view. So I have lots of hats in there. I also head up managed services. I've been in that role for a while, helping out there. We are looking for a head of managed services at the moment because I've got a day job as a COO.
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned before we started recording that you wear a few hats, and that was I should have timed how long it took you to explain all the different hats you wear. That was that is a list. And you know what? It'd be great for someone like me, honestly, coming from Brisbane in Queensland over here in Australia, and not knowing too much about OLR. Can you give, and for any other listeners out there from any part of the world where they're maybe not familiar? So you mentioned 7 locations around the world. Is that right?
Yep, 7. It was
And
actually originally founded in Australia, OLR, but it's expanded and moved out of Australia. But it's mainly based in the UK, is where our head office is.
amazing.
Porto, we've got an office in Porto. Porto's a lovely city. If you get the chance, go to there. The US got a big presence in the US. That's very popular at the moment. Singapore, India, and then some other places, North America, Canada, and some in Mexico as well.
And you mentioned HR comes under your role as operations. Is that right?
It does. Yep.
Yes.
Yep,
And so
which is good fun.
what's the footprint in terms of how many staff do you have across the world? Just out of interest, to give people a bit of an idea of what what you're sort of working with around the world. I like to sort of paint the picture of the organization for those like me who enjoy imagining an organization structure.
Yeah, we're about 230 currently. We've got nearly 40 open positions, which is challenging in its own right for an organisation of our size. We're expanding at the moment. Mainly, I think anywhere between 100 and 110 in India at any one time,
Yep.
and the rest is split between UK, US, and Portugal are our main areas.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. No, that's really helpful. Thank you for unpacking that. I have to admit, your industry is an industry that I don't have too much experience in. So I know for me, I'm really interested to chat about leadership because I love learning about how industries that I don't have as much experience in attack the same leadership principles, right? That are universal. So yeah, it's great to have you on. Let's talk about I guess Matthew, the leader. If you look back, tell us a bit of the story of how you came to be the leader that you are in the role that you're in. But just the sort of the overarching story, Matthew Singleton's story of leadership.
Yeah. You say you're not familiar with the industry I'm in. I wasn't until about 10 years ago. Prior to that, I had I'd been in banking literally from when I left school. So I'd had a good 25 years in banking. So my journey to where I am is probably unconventional. I went into IBD, International Banking Division, went straight out of school, which was great. Back in the day, we physically handled checks and we had to take them to the clearing houses, and it was very, very interesting. I wouldn't say that's had a huge impact on my leadership style though, and I spent, as I say, a long time in banking, in IT, within banking, and for me, there's there's a bit of a, you get very specialized in a very large organization, and when you're very good at one thing, you get specialized even more. So towards the end of my career in banking, I was in technology in a specific area, and was pretty well pigeonholed. So it's very hard to make the step from technical to leadership, or to team lead or management within banking when you're highly technical. There's also a huge churn rate within banking, especially with IT, and it's very much seen as a cost rather than an enabler. And I sort of came to understand that, and I think at one point my last 4 years I worked at Citigroup, I'd had 7 managers, and the churn of manager and being able to impress your manager and demonstrate, hey, I can do the next step, was really tough, really hard. So back in about 2008, I think I led a team, and again they were based in different regions, which was a good learning point. But I'd really come to the end of wanting to work for huge organizations. 370,000 people within one organization is a big company, and I'd worked within small teams within there, and I preferred that interaction. So when I left Citigroup back in 2007, 2008, whatever it was, there was I wanted a change, and I wanted to manage people. I wanted to manage teams, and I had the technology, but I didn't want to go back into banking and do banking technology. I wanted something different, and I found myself at a company called Rank. May not remember them, but they did Mecca Bingo, they did Grosvenor Casinos. They used to do lots of films back in the day. Used to do photocopiers, so they transitioned a lot, but they're quite big in the UK, and it was on the e-commerce side. So I was able to pick up the e-com side of technology quite easily. I had a background in Microsoft, and there I got, it was a conscious decision to literally say I'm not technical. I had to hide the fact I was technical, to not get pushed back down that route of, hey, can you do this? Can you fix this? Can you design this, or whatever it was? Because and there was also my career path. I recognized that to become a CTO, you sort of had to have been a developer. There was a big call, everything's web-based now. The internet's a big thing. It's applications, it's Internet of Things, but it's very much all this is based on, do you understand the architecture of these things? Can you push them forward? So the CTO role for me didn't seem feasible. I felt there was a glass ceiling getting to that, unless I went in to be a bit more of a developer full time. And then the CII role was probably one that I thought, that's something I could aim for. And so it was, hey, I'm gonna drop the technical part. But then again, there was also the operations side, which is very much do you understand all the parts of the business? Do you understand the business as well as how people work within the business? Can you be that conduit between the different departments? And I'd always found that was something I was able to do. And I'd enjoyed it, and maybe some of it was born out of experience of the length of time I've been in work, or whatever. So I really pushed when I was at Rank to manage teams and not to be seen as technical. And I don't want to offend anybody here that's technical, that is listening. That's great if that's where you want to go. Push towards the CIO or the CTO role and focus on that. And then once I'd been at Rank for a while, again, I felt there needed to be a change to get to what I wanted to do. And then I applied to work in a company called E2X. E2X, again, was an Oracle Gold partner. E2X actually bought OLR. So I went into E2X as an operations manager. It was to oversee a lot of the e-com solutions we provided for their clients. I came on board, did that, and within smaller companies, you get more of an opportunity to demonstrate your capabilities, and that's one thing I found straight away. E2X, there was only about 100 people there at the time, was that actually I was getting involved in a lot of things because I was able to demonstrate that I could have an impact. My decision-making process worked. I was able to take on more responsibility because in a company that size, you do have to wear several hats, regardless of what position you're in. And then we bought OLR. It was very much an organic acquisition for E2X. OLR complemented E2X in terms of what they could bring. It wasn't, hey, let's just expand our client base. It was, what does OLR have that E2X doesn't, and put the two together, and we grow to a size that was better, worked for both companies. So we purchased them, and then I moved from E2X to OLR. So even though I may be an OLR person now for the last 3 years, whatever, I've my total time at the company is 7-8 years. So when I went into OLR, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, there was a lot of work that needed to be done, and I came across as COO to help facilitate that and make those changes happen.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Something that jumped out at me, when you were at Citibank, what was your technical specialty?
There's probably not over. I was Microsoft based, so you could probably say I was a Wintel engineer, but what I specialized while I was in the bank was at the end, because I was there about 14 years, was managing the desktop. And that doesn't sound much, but when I put numbers against, an organization of that size, we used to have applications that people could request and they would put them on your desktop. So there was a build process for that. So you needed the previous version in case you had to roll back, and then you needed the new version of what you requested. But we had 3,400 applications. So there needs to be a build process and a governance process around those. And then there needs to be a process of getting them on the desktop. So we needed the capabilities of that. So I managed that. Within Europe, EMEA, where I was based, I looked after 70,000 desktops. So, they're huge numbers. And then I wrote a couple of bits of software within that framework of the desktop that was rolled out to all of the desktops. So 370,000 desktops had a couple of bits of software that I wrote, and I could manage all the desktops from my PC.
Wow.
So there's a bit of a scary thought. And this is a bit of a story I have. I wrote some software, maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago, that could put all the machines to sleep or turn them off, because everyone used to just leave their machines on all the time. And that alone in EMEA would have saved the company £8 million a year in electricity bills. Globally it was around about 23 million. But one of the funny bits was I was writing this software that could control it. So what we used to do is we'd have these times where you'd have to power down the building. You'd have to do a DR test, or you'd have to check that the generators could kick in and switch over. And what we didn't want was everything to just be switched off, literally by the switch. So I wrote the software which could turn off our building in effect. So what we do is previously we'd send a couple of people around to run around the whole entire building. We used to get about 5 or 6 people, and they would switch off the machines. So I wrote this software that could switch off all the machines, which sounds like good until you realize that, hey, I can sit at home and switch off 370,000 desktops in push of a button. And while I was writing this software, I asked for a zone which was only me, no one else, and a load of desktops. And they said, no, you gotta write it. And maybe this is why I never became a developer. On the Friday night, I was testing this one bit and I went home, and on the Monday I came in and carried on working, and I clicked the button and I thought this isn't doing what I thought it was going to do, and I turned off an entire floor instantly. So there's a lesson to be learned. Definitely give someone a playground to play in, and no one noticed though. Everyone thought it was a power glitch. It was that good. 16 machines instantly.
That's so good.
I did own up to it. I did tell everyone.
Yeah. Oh, that must be.
They never gave me a playground to play in though.
That's right. That's right.
There's that bit where you just think,
what just happened? Oh no!
Why isn't that doing what I thought it was going to do?
Yeah.
And then the blood drains out of you completely.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. So I guess for you as a leader, in terms of the leader that you are today, what are some of the stories, if you think back, what comes to mind as maybe one of the stories that was part of shaping you, really impacted you to shape you into who you are today as a leader? There are any times that come to mind? Might have been when you were younger and volunteering, or in school, or in early work, or more recently. What comes to mind for you, Matthew?
I suppose, what sort of a leader am I? How has it affected me? What have I seen along the way? Have I picked up little things as I go along? Is there one? I've got a few stories of stuff that you think that's incredible.
Yeah.
Would that really happen? Would that happen today? Would you, how would you react? I like to think of myself as empathetic, a critical thinker, someone that will view everything from every angle before I give my answer. But I also like to think that, I might not have the life experiences of the person that's got the issues, but I think it's self-reflective, where you're a sum of the parts, where what gets me out of bed in the morning, what makes me deliver, what did I respond to, I think would make me a leader. Is how I've tried to view things. I'm not stubborn, but I like to believe in what I'm doing, and I think people respond to, I believe where we're going, and that's the bit that has probably worked for me. But what shaped me, and I think about all the people I've worked for, that have led me. I've worked with. I always think there's people that you can point at and say, they're brilliant or they're exceptional, and you come across them once every 5 years, once every 10 years. They really stand out head and shoulders. And I had a manager very early on in my career in the bank, Tom Delves, and he was a great guy, and he really seemed to understand people. Don't get me wrong, I fully appreciate that you're on the side of the people that work for you, and you're leading, and you've got your responsibilities commercially to the company, and the two are very separate. But as a people person, somebody you wanted to follow, Tom was that person, and he really understood the people that work, and he treated everybody with respect, and he treated everyone as individuals. And you felt that he really did care. Maybe he did, but I did get that. And I remember, I was very young at the time, 16, 17, and he told me a story. So the first time I had a long lunch, and don't blame me here, Jono, but back in banking, there was a drinking culture in those times. I wasn't the only person. It was about it. Long lunches were a thing. And I look back now and think, I don't know how I survived. And when I first, when I first worked for Tom, I moved internally, and I'd maybe this is a story. I'd been recognised within the bank of having a talent at maybe being able to be a good developer, and I was put forward for a test. I didn't know. None of this had been told to me. I didn't know that I'd been found, and I did this test, and it was at the time to become a developer on cash machines. Cash machines quite new then. I suppose what you call ATMs.
Yes.
And I hadn't been told this, so they just said, "Look, you need to go for this test." So I went along, did this test, came back, and it turned out I'd passed this test. No one had told me this. No one, and my boss at the time had he'd taken exception to me, shall we say, and he'd turned down the opportunity on my behalf. So I hadn't been told. That they'd sent me through. They'd sent a request saying, "Hey, we want Matthew to come and work in this department. He shows an aptitude for it," and it got turned down. There was an actual letter saying, Matthew, I've spoken to him. He doesn't want to do this. Thank you very much. So when I worked for Tom, he, at the interview, he said that I want to take you on, and I think you're a good guy. And he said, I've been told you're a beast to manage. And so he said, I was expecting a 200-pound gorilla to walk through the door, and he said, you're not. And he said, I like you. And he actually slid the letter over to me. He said, look, I'm going to tell you right now, your previous manager turned down this job opportunity for you. He said, I wouldn't have done that. I'm letting you see it, just so you know. And it was, straight away from the start, he had my respect because he treated me like an adult. I was only 16, 17 at the time. And I thought, this guy trusts me. And before I'd, turn up on day one, I trust Tom. And he was a great guy to work for. And I don't want to spend the whole hour talking about Tom, but he told me, the first long lunch we went for, he took me out for a long lunch. He said, look, here's a story. The first, my first job I went to, boss took me out first day, went for a long lunch. We got back, we'd had a couple of beers, we'd been out for a couple of hours, and I sat down at my desk and my boss called me back in and he said, I'm giving you a verbal warning for taking a long lunch. And you go, hold on, I went to lunch with you. And he said, this, as much as this is a verbal warning, it's going on your HR record. This is also a life lesson. Do not trust anyone. And you sort of look back and you go, wow, that's harsh. How do you react to that? But it's, Tom told me that story and it was like, Tom was telling, as much as, I really liked Tom, he was probably saying, don't trust me either, but don't trust anyone. I think he took me under his wing a bit. I think it was more of that story.
That's just a fantastic story. He takes him out for a long lunch and gives him a warning. See, you shouldn't have even trusted him. It's interesting though. I love reflecting on people like Tom because I think the leaders, for any leaders who are listening, and I know this is very true of me. We want to leave a legacy like Tom. We want people to look back and say, "Oh, that's right. I remember when I worked for." Matthew, when I worked for Jono, I love hearing stories about people like Tom. Like you said, we won't spend the whole time talking about him, but I'm interested to know, as you think back, what was it that you mentioned a couple of things, but was there anything else that stood out that he did in how he treated you, in how he led you, in how he met with you, that you would point to and go, I think that was really, that was another reason as to why why he comes to mind and why he was you really trusted him so much.
Tom, he his honesty, I think, his honesty, and he had the ability to, on an individual basis with everyone in his team, to find out what made them perform, what made them tick. Things he didn't do the same thing with everybody.
Yeah.
He recognized people not stressed. I don't want to say that. He'd recognized what needed to be done to allow that person to perform. Back in whenever this was, you didn't work. You couldn't work from home. There wasn't the ability to work from home. You couldn't remote into work. That technology just did not exist then. But he would quarantine people from the outside world, should we say, to enable them to function. And he would recognize that very early on in people through how others were working with them, interacting with them. I just think he had a huge natural empathy and understood the place people were in within their job.
Yeah, that's I like how you unpacked that, and I think it always surprises me how often honesty comes up, because I think we underestimate how we assume that being honest, that people don't want honesty. There's some part of us that we go, or maybe it's because it's just uncomfortable to be honest sometimes, and yet I just hear it so often that people who've had great experiences with leaders talk about how they were honest, how they knew that they knew where they stood. That's something that people often talk about. Oh yeah, I really know where I stand, and I think that's a challenge, definitely for me anyway, in my leadership, is to lead with more honesty. So no, thank you. That was a really really rich story, Matthew. I appreciate you sharing that.
I think honesty is one of the pillars of trust. And I think the worst thing you can do with a leader or anybody you work with, you lose the trust. If you lose trust, that relationship is it's negative, isn't it? It's not going to work in the long run.
It's so hard to come back from as well if you do lose that trust. So for you, because I noticed as well that you talked quite a lot about wanting to lead people and manage teams, and that was something that you were drawn to, and so much of that is trust. So I guess if we stay with this topic, what have you learned about building trust? What have you learned about building teams now that you've been doing it a while? You've been you've had the chance. You went from banking into this smaller organization where you had more opportunity to really I guess jump in there, and so from all of this, including your time in banking, what have you learned about trust and about building teams?
I think building teams, I think one of my strengths is building high performance teams that do deliver. And maybe that's why I'm in the role I am, is that I can mold teams. I think I can, I like to think I can. And my personal view, what I strive for key, I don't like huge teams. I prefer smaller teams where everyone is fully qualified, overqualified maybe. You've got the best people in that position and you work as a team. Everybody understands what we're trying to deliver and why we're trying to deliver it. And that you got to be honest there. You can dress it up, but eventually people will see through that. If they don't buy into what you're delivering, they won't have the enthusiasm. So there's several parts of this, high performing teams, and what you'll find as well, it depends what industry you're in, what level the teams are, and no offense, the education level of those within a team. One thing that I learned quite early on was people with degrees at some stage in their life have been validated. Their opinion's been validated. That they've written something and some very highly qualified people have read it and said, you're right. So it's not like, they've answered a question, that they've done research, they've been validated. And people with degrees are more likely to want to have an opinion that's heard. They're going to want to be listened to. So you have to, for me, high performing teams, if it is people with degrees or highly educated people, if that's the industry, and they need to be involved in the decision making. I have absolutely no issue with everybody else making decisions, as long as they're the right decisions, obviously. So put it out there, get the people involved, and if you've got a team, a smaller team, you can have those discussions. Don't get me wrong, I don't think good decisions are ever made by a committee, but people need to be listened to. That they have to have their input into that, into what you're trying to deliver. I'm also a big believer of I don't want to force people into the job. Don't turn up, day on day. don't. One of the things I tell people that I work with or work for me is, how do you feel Sunday night? Do you look forward to getting up in the morning? You don't have to, don't get me wrong, you don't have to look forward to it, but don't fear Monday mornings. Don't dread them. If you're dreading it, go and find something else. Really, go and find something you're interested in, you're excited about, you want to do, because it's 8-9 hours a day minimum, 5 days a week. It's a big chunk of your life. So really do that. That's, and if you get those people in your team that they are getting up Monday morning because they want to do it, that's half the battle already. They're coming into work, they're skipping into work, they want to be there. They'll buy in because they're probably doing something they want to do. So I find that I try to be genuine with people, and genuine honesty, trust, those things that we're probably going to go round circle on, and that's the teams that I tried to build. And you can recognize it in people that they're in a role that it's not right for them. That it's not that they're no good at their role. It's they haven't got a smile on their face. It's not what they want to do. And yes, there are periods of any career where you got to do stuff you don't want to do, or you may have a role you don't want to do. But I'm talking about overall. Is this a 6-month thing? Is it have you been unhappy in this position for years? Are you hanging on? Are you just looking for your redundancy? Are you just looking for your retirement? Are you just looking for a way out? Go and find something. Go and do it. Brush up that CV. And I do give people that advice that are actively working for me. Keep your CV up to date. I know that sounds hideous, but don't wait 3-4 years and then say, I don't want to be here. Keep it up to date all the time. And that's not hey, get up and run, but it's a way of making you feel that I'm part of this organization, but I'm also myself outside of it. And where's my career going? Is this where I want to be? So you don't want to hang on to people that don't want to be there, even if they're brilliant. I'd prefer someone's happy and working elsewhere than miserable and working for me. I don't want to be that boss that you dread speaking to on a Monday morning.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I haven't thought about it that way before, and it's I think it's a very refreshing perspective, because what it says to, and I can imagine that it would be endearing for people who are leading up to that perspective, because it says I actually care more about you than I care equally about you and your happiness as I do with us achieving what we want to achieve. I think those things both can be achieved, and I think sometimes we do. It is easier to go, oh, it would be such a hassle for me to find someone else, rather than to let go of that and go, actually, no, this person deserves to enjoy what they're doing, and how can I encourage them in that, even if that means encouraging them to brush up their CV and saying, if you're not enjoying this, then find something you really enjoy, and being a support to them. That's really profound. One thing I want to zoom in on that you mentioned was about getting people involved in the decision making. How do you do that? If you say you've got someone listening and they have a team of people, particularly who maybe are highly educated, and so their ears are sort of they're going, oh, that's really interesting. What does it look like when you've got a team of highly educated people and you are running a process? Like, I'm talking, how do you do that in meetings? How do you do that in terms of project management, making decisions so that you're involving them in the decision making process?
A good question. I think start with the worst case scenario here. What do you, John? What do you think would be the worst place to get decisions made? What do you think that would be? Where do you think that would be?
Oh, well, I would say if decisions are made, I don't know, maybe the highest. If they're just made solely at the highest level without the right information, that would be potentially bad. But it would also be, you also don't want to be running a consensus where it's just, everyone's just making any decision. You do want alignment. I don't know if I answered that question.
So I think the worst place to get decisions made is universities. Everybody round the table has a PhD. Can you imagine how hard that would be? Everyone is super convinced they are right.
Yeah.
So you got to work back from there. You think, well, we don't have all PhDs here, so nothing against PhD. I looked at doing mine, but it's, hey, we haven't got the challenge they've got. So, be thankful you're not, unless anybody listening to this is on the board of a university, then I feel sorry for you. But, you draw it back, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve here? What is the decision we're making? That's the other bit as well. What is the size of the decision you're making? Is it a strategic decision? Is it a plan? A lot of people, I find, confuse the two. When you ask for a strategy, they give you a plan. The strategy. If it's a strategy decision, then there's only a level that can be made at. That's that's an accountable. If this doesn't work, not that the company's in trouble, but you're betting the company on it to a degree, and then you're drawing it back from what are these decisions. If I'm talking from a technology perspective, it's an architectural decision. Then you're going to have people slightly more qualified, but it's always good to get people around a table. Let's chuck it up. You can't get away from a whiteboard. All right, we might all be sitting around tables now. A metaphorical whiteboard. Hash it out. What are the decisions? Don't be precious about the decisions. That's one thing for me as well. Sometimes it's better to get the decisions done and start working towards them. And be able to change tack if you need to along the way. Hey, we made the wrong decision, but we know where we want to get to. The destination is far more important than the journey. Maybe that's not right, but you know what I mean. An emergent strategy says we know where we want to go. How we get there may change, and I'm on board with that. Don't be precious. And when you've made those decisions and you've included people in it, don't be afraid of dropping that decision or overruling. But one thing what you may find is that you've gone in, what, and it's human nature, what you want out of that meeting, and don't steer it. You may let people come up with your decision and you give them credit for it, regardless that you may have made that decision before you walked into the meeting. Obviously don't do that every time, but and listen to people. And another part of, I think, leadership, and I want to say empathetic, but why people make their decisions will help you understand how they've got to that decision. So I've talked about technology. We spoke about HR in the beginning. HR is it's a very, very complex. It's not complicated, it's complex. There's a difference. It's a complex job. What one decision you make doesn't have the same output every single time. You may do the same thing 20 times and it's fine, and then the 21st time in HR you cause issues. It's that's why it's not complicated. If it's complicated, you'd make the same decision, you'd get the same outcome. You don't get that with HR. So we can sit around and make decisions, group-wide decisions that we feel, hey, we've got to treat everyone the same way, and no good deed goes unpunished, because you do what you think is right for everybody, you put it out there, and you upset some people. One region could be absolutely ecstatic with your decision, and another region is hugely offended or unhappy, or there's grumblings, but they're all made from the single point and for the right reasons. No one's trying. You have to recognize no one's trying to make a bad decision. And then you've got to be. Sometimes you've just got to let everybody else lead it. You're in that room. You may be the most senior person in there, but let other people take the reins and run with it. And sometimes you can even turn up a meeting and say, right, point at someone. You're running this meeting today. The decision is going to be down to you, because you can still override those decisions if you want to. You've still got the casting vote, as it were, as the most senior person in the room. But I do like to to get people in there and enjoying it and making decisions, and you get to see other points of view. What's the point in telling everyone? It'd be boring if we did that.
Yeah, it's I like how you mentioned coming in with an idea, but then seeing people, letting people actually come to that result. I remember when I first heard that, I thought it sounded manipulative, but my experience, yeah, like there's something in that where you think, oh, but it's not. I heard something just in the past couple of days from I think it was an interview with Kim Scott, who wrote a book called Radical Candor, which is all about basically, leading, like we're talking about, leading with honesty, and I think she talks about the combination of personal caring with direct, or a different word, but personal caring with direct challenge. And if you can personally care for people, but also bring sort of direct challenge to them, she talks about this idea of candor. But she said something which she said something that made me think of what you explained there, which was, you don't want to call it radical truth. You don't want to come in and say, I've got to tell you the truth about this feedback. It's called candor because you're just coming in and you're saying, here's what I see, tell me what you see. And that's been my experience for when I've worked with leaders who've been hesitant to come into a team and really allow collaboration, often because they're holding very tightly to a process or outcomes. And I've encouraged them and said, you know what, I think you'll often find that if you actually put this out there to the team, what you come up with in this room, if you facilitate it with if you have a team of people who are well intentioned, and if you have, a minimal ability to facilitate, you're going to come up with the same thing, if not better. And it's amazing how often people in a team often come out with, particularly when we're talking about things like values, or about things like behaviors for a team. When I've done this sort of work, it's amazing how often the same things come out from the team. But my encouragement to leaders is to actually let go of it. It's sort of that process of saying, okay, what do you see? And being open to hear that, because that is a bit scary, but like you're saying, that's where people flourish. And there's a great Patrick Lencioni saying, people won't buy in unless they weigh in. And people have to actually have the opportunity to weigh in.
Yeah.
And then they'll good. Buy in. So I think there's some great thoughts there. So when it comes to the hats you wear, I'm interested to know because we talked about trust, we talked about honesty. Like I said, when I was, I mentioned this to you about doing the podcast, Matthew. My hope is really to, I believe people listening will be like me, where they're people who are interested in leadership and want to find out more about all the different facets of leadership. So I guess this is a chance to talk about a topic of your choice around leadership that you're really passionate about. Is there anything that maybe you've been reading something recently? Maybe it's a topic that for the past decade has been right up there for you. Maybe it is honesty, and we go deeper in that. Or what's a topic, generally speaking, because leaders are people running small businesses, running massive organizations in all sorts of different roles in education. What would be a topic for us to spend a bit of time digging into that you're really passionate about?
Tricky one. I've got a few things spring to mind. That there's passionate and there's challenging. We probably touched on it previously on the last bit. I'm very passionate about empowering people, and letting people grow, and seeing them flourish. And maybe that's the side of me, as we did, being self-reflective, touched on earlier, is about caring for the person. I'm a true believer that if you empower people, let them grow, the teams will do well and will do better. And as a leader, you can't be afraid of of other people doing well. That doesn't reflect badly on you.
Yeah.
They're not going to climb over you. It's not that. And as a leader, how the team does reflects on you, not the individual. Is my belief. If you have one individual not doing well, as a leader, you'll have that conversation of, what do we do with that individual? That's a conversation you're gonna have. You can't avoid that, and you're gonna have lots of those conversations in your career. if the team's doing badly, that will reflect. Why is your team? That's the question you're going to get: is why is your team not performing? It will no longer be the individual. You're accountable for that. We've got the difference between responsible and accountable, and I'm quite keen on that as well to differentiate between the two. So if you've got individuals that you empower and they grow, the team will follow suit, and that will reflect on you as a leader. So maybe, and I don't know if that's a subject or an individual trait, but that's something that I'm passionate about. If you wanted to, you pick on either of these, that's something I'm passionate about. And then there's another bit for me, which is a challenge that I definitely don't have the answer to, and I'm working on is culture change within an organization. And as you talked about, small companies, medium, large, growth challenges within a company. That's an interesting topic for me as well. So
yeah,
Jono, you pick one. Pick one of those.
Let's start with the latter, because I actually think they're both just great. I'm thinking of all the situations where I've been working with leaders where I think those two things. So if I was to summarize culture change and growth change specifically, was the latter one, and the first one was about empowering people to be really successful, and particularly to work together and lead and be a successful team. And how do you empower the people? How do you raise leaders? How do you develop leaders? How do you develop the people you're leading? That's just a gold mine. I think there are so many leaders who would be sitting up and going, "Oh, I want to work out how to do that." But let's talk about growth and culture first. So, what do you see as the biggest challenge for you around culture change, particularly in a fast growth organization? Is that what you're talking about when you're saying growth change? That there's fast growth?
I think the two can be linked, and they can also be very separate. Culture change, where you've got an embedded culture within a company. Smaller maybe easier. The bigger the company gets, the harder it's going to be. How do you change that? How do you? To me, that's the tanker. It's a long. It's not an easy turn. It's a 4-mile round circle. It's a real challenge. And I don't know the answer to this, and I've come up against it, and you can try lots of things. There's the, hey, as somebody I work with said, you bring them on the journey. Do you bring them on the journey, and do you show people? But what you tend to find with an embedded culture is people believe in that culture. Change is hard enough anyway for people to turn around and say, what you've been doing previously is wrong, and I don't believe, because that's what they'll hear.
Yes.
You're trying to make a change. When it's a change in process, when it's a change in governance, when it's a structural change, you can demonstrate that to people. It's nearly tangible. There is something there you can say, if we do this, this will be better. Now with culture, you'll turn around saying, the way you behave, the way you act, the way you treat each other is wrong. That's a big ask. That really is a big ask. And I would say for an aspiring leader or somebody looking for a different role, do you want that challenge when you go somewhere else? I don't know. Yes or no. You may relish that challenge, or you may say, look, I see it quite often where people will interview for roles or look for roles, and they'll think the culture of that company doesn't fit with my ideals. Now, that's great when you've got that opportunity to turn that down. Now, put yourself in that position of, hey, I've got to work at that culture and I need to change the culture. That's a challenge of mine. How do you do that? That's a big thing. And you may be turning around saying that rarely happens, but I'd actually say it happens more than you think as well, especially with acquisitions. Two companies, they're going to collide somehow. And when you go from a small company, where when we're saying small, less than 50, should we say, the CEO or the leadership team there know everybody by name. They probably interview everyone at some stage, and everyone there is pretty well handpicked. And when the company scales, that can't happen, and there's going to come a point where they're not going to know that person. And they didn't have an input on that person coming on board. I've seen statistics around CEOs. A good CEO probably gets a hire right 75% of the time. So they have a good hit rate, whereas the lower down in the organization, they don't generally get that hit rate. So there's a culture thing there, and there's a skill of the person within the company challenge as well.
And so, say you were sitting down over a coffee with, a young leader who has just taken a role, given a big opportunity to come into a small business, and they're working alongside a CEO, and the CEO said, "I want you to help me change this culture." And they, "Oh, okay." And they're sitting down with you, and they say, "Well, what advice would you give them? What's maybe one of the things you might say? Where do you start? What are the levers you pull? Any it is such a hard area. Any thoughts on that?
You've got to define what that culture is with the CEO. Like any culture change has to start at the top, and it has to flow down. And those from the CEO down have to buy into it as well. So when we talk about executive sponsorship for any changes, this is the top one. The CEO has to believe it. It has to come from them. They have to set it nearly. They can work with HR. You can work with your leadership team and get everyone's input on what the culture should be. But unless the CEO believes it, it's not going to go anywhere. And it has to be literally an agenda item at your exec meetings. Those in that exec meeting have to believe it. And you've got to recognize, is any of the barriers to change within that executive team? Because if they are, you're not going to affect it straight away. And you have to be realistic there. So, as a leader, number one, you define it, know it, believe it, be bought into it, be genuine with it. Make sure everybody on that exec team is at the same position as you, and it is an agenda item. We can talk about implementing change within the company, but that would be my number one, page one of the Changing Culture book.
I think you're 100% correct. I think a phrase that I use a lot is that the leader is the ceiling, and I wish it wasn't as true as I've come to believe that it is, because there's so many times I'll be chatting with a leader and they're leading up, and they're describing the leader that they're leading up to, and it might be a case of a leader really wanting a culture with more vulnerability, more honesty, more just that real, two-way communication. And they're leading up to a leader who may or may not have the self-awareness, but is actually embodying and creating a culture across the organization where it's top-down and where it's directive rather than two-way, and there's a lack of vulnerability. And I find myself really stumped in these conversations when people are saying, "What can I do?" Because my answer is often, if this is a deal breaker for you, I have bad news, because your leader will be the ceiling. And if your leader is not embodying that, then that's a red flag And if you can put up with that, there's always things that you go, well, you can't be completely idealistic. People are human beings, and we all have weaknesses and flaws. But I completely agree, and I think that what you're saying, the reason I love it so much is if the CEO, which I've seen before, is saying, I want this type of culture, X, Y, Z, and you look at them and go, uh-oh, in your mind, they they are sort of the polar opposite of that, and particularly when they may not realize that. I think that should be a big red flag. And there's no easy answers for that, is there? If someone's in that situation,
No.
because like you said, if the leader's not on board, if the CEO is not bought in, there's a great saying which is, you don't build culture, you can only be culture. And I think that, like, just the point being that if you're the point leader, where you need to start is actually by embodying the things that you want to see. Like, that's one of the best ways you can start, is just actually behave that way yourself and model it. Sounds simple, but I think there is something profound about that, because if your leader's not bought in, particularly if they're not aligned to that, then you got no chance. So I think you hit the nail on the head. That's awesome. And we're getting pretty close to sort of the hour mark, so I'll wrap up soon. But I do want to, maybe I'll give you the same question about empowerment, because say you've got a leader, and there would be many, would be my guess, who would be listening to this, if they're anything like me, and really umming and ahhing about how to better empower the people they're leading. I think the frustration that I often hear is, how do I empower the people I'm leading when work still needs to be done? There's still just the day-to-day work that person is doing, but at the same time, I want to grow them. And sometimes that's a real tension, because I want to empower them to be everything they can be, but at the same time, there's a reality to there's things they just need to tick off the list tomorrow. That's definitely one of the frustrations I hear, and a bit of confusion I hear from leaders a lot about when they're trying to empower their team. But what advice would you give to a leader who says, Matthew, how do I really want to empower these people I'm leading? Where do I start? What's one of the things I might do?
It's the letting go of the control. You've got to, however old your child is, and the first time you take the stabilizers off, there's the anxiety of letting go of the seat and seeing if they're going to cycle down the road or crash into something. It's not easy. I'm not going to lie. You've got to understand if you can do it first. Are you able to let go? It's part of creating autonomy. A part of that, I think, is, I don't want to be cliched with, it's not a blame culture. We're not pointing fingers. You have to accept that you can't blame someone if you're asking them to do it. If you're trying to empower them and you're giving them the ability to do that, then you've got to be accepting of it. And the leadership team, whoever you report into, if you don't report into anyone, you've got to accept it. If you report into someone, they've got to accept it, that you can't do all the work yourself as a leader. You just can't. Why employ people and then do that job? It's it's madness, isn't it? So if you can't let go, and you need the control, and you can't create autonomy, then you're going to struggle. You need to be able to do that. There's nothing wrong with empowering people and deflecting any challenges they may have that is stopping them getting there. So you've got to give somebody the capacity, and by capacity I mean the room to be able to do that. One thing I say to people is, I'm asking you to do this. Any issues, or if there's anything you're struggling with, or there's priorities, come and speak to me. send people my way, because I'm happy to. I'm not there to be the big bad boss and say, you're talking to someone more senior. I'm happy to have the conversation around, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is the workload we've got, and this is the reality or the expectations or what I can do for you. I'm trying to let people see what we're doing, instead of saying, hand up saying no, it can't be done. Sorry, that's not what I want to do. And maybe that's a leadership style. Maybe I'm on the leadership end of the, rather than versus the management style. But again, that's getting people to buy into what you're trying to deliver. So empowering people is, you've got to understand if they're doing it or not. Don't get me wrong, you've still got to understand. Empowering is still a task, should we say, they've got to deliver. If you're empowering someone, say, hey, go away and do that, they've still got to deliver that piece of work, whatever that that involves. If it's, look, I want you to run this team, or I want you to manage these people, or I want you to take a greater role within this, I want you to make decisions. It's all something you're asking us to do. It's good saying empowering, and we can give lip service to it, but there is still an output, and I don't want to say measure, but there is still an output you will want from empowering that person or that team.
How do you take the training wheels off? How do you let go? Say someone's listening and they go, I want to let go, but I've gotten feedback now for a while that I'm struggling to let go, and people are saying you need to let go more. How do you actually do that? How do you it sounds a bit like a silly question, but I do feel like it can be a challenge to actually know how to take the training wheels off.
I suppose you've got to be, to a degree, self-reflective. What is stopping you doing that? Is it you is that your management style? You just cannot do that. I have a saying, somebody with a long screwdriver, they're detached, but they're still trying to get involved, and it's like, please do not. Let the people do the work that are tasked with doing that work. That's part of being self-reflective. Is it a personal trait, or is it that the people you're trying to empower, you still haven't built enough trust? They haven't demonstrated the capabilities. It's no good empowering people just to say you've empowered people just for the sake of it. The people that you're empowering at some stage have to have demonstrated those qualities, those skills, what you're looking for. Otherwise, you wouldn't be thinking you're going to do it. And then part of the leadership skill is you've recognized that, and you've seen somebody that can do that. Otherwise, it's not a task for you. Part of stepping up from being to being, your first team lead role or your first management role. A lot of the time, companies will do it because someone's very good at their job. They're very good at, whatever, that part of their job. They're very technical, or they're very good at sales, or they're a people person, or whatever.
Yeah.
What you need to recognize in this example of empowering, of running a team or leading people, is, have they demonstrated those leadership qualities, those management qualities? Are they the sort of person that is it can work autonomously? Do they bring things to you? Do they work independently, or do you have to continually check what they're doing, ask for updates, manage where they are? Do they come to you? So there's a bit of, as I said, there's self-reflective. Is it you stopping it happening? Do you not have it in your makeup, or is it actually you do have it and you could do it, but the people that work for you, you don't feel they're ready for it yet? And if they're not ready for it, or they haven't demonstrated it, then you need to put something in place that's going to create that. What do you need to see from them? I wouldn't tell people, I'm trying to empower you. You set them tasks that you hope that they'll pick up, or they'll recognize as an opportunity, and they'll want to impress you, or they'll want to deliver it, or it is something they actually want to do. If they don't, then it's maybe not time for them, or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Self-reflect on why it's challenging for you to let go, and look at your team and ask yourself, have I, are they displaying the traits to be able to do this? I love what you said about people getting promoted because they're good at their job, not necessarily because they're good at they're showing the traits to be a good manager or leader, and
Yeah.
that's gold. I definitely think that's, and I think I've caught myself doing that before as well. You see someone who's great at a job, and you go, "Wow, imagine them in a leadership role." And you go, "Wait a second, why am I assuming just because they're amazing at that they would then be incredible when they're at a strategic level, or when they're, there's a good chance that some of the characteristics will cross over, but there's also a good chance that that the very thing that makes them so good at their job can sometimes be a bit of a challenge or a weakness when you get into a
Yeah.
management or leadership role. And the I guess just as a bit of a plug, I'm actually working on my next book at the moment, which is about this topic. It wasn't really the plan to bring this up, but because we're talking about it so directly, I'm working on a book. The working title, although I'm pretty sure this is what it will be, is called "Replace Yourself," and the whole idea is about viewing empowering your people as trying to raise up leaders around you. Like the real idea is to have a team of people where if you were promoted, if you got an opportunity to go somewhere else or to take another opportunity, there'd be three people on your team who could step up and replace you. And actually raising up and empowering and lifting the ceiling of the leaders in your team. And it was great because I was just thinking about some of the things I'm working on in the book around how do you identify who could replace you. And that's exactly what you were saying. How are you looking for the traits, and then having intentional conversations with people about what you see in them, and then just practically, I think there is a really practical element of showing people and actually letting them watch you do certain things. And there's a great square of leadership delegation. I can't remember the exact phrase they use. I didn't come up with it, but it's a square, and it starts on the top left with I watch. You watch, I do, and then the top right it moves around to. If you imagine a square from the top left to the top right, is you help, I do. So I'm still doing it, but now you've gone from watching to helping. And the bottom right is where it flips. So instead of me doing it and you helping me, that's where I'm now helping you and you're the one doing it. And then the bottom left is where you want to get to, which is where you're doing it and I'm watching, in terms of I've stood back now and I'm just helping. I'm just holding you accountable for it. And I love that sort of square of delegation, because I think sometimes we think about these things as too black or white. Either we are or we aren't, and it's like, well, no, there is. Sometimes it's helpful to think there's a process. Maybe there is something in your leadership that the people in your team aren't ready to do, but you could invite them to watch how you do it, and actually just have conversations with them around that, because that's a great starting point to then. That is a form of empowerment, because you're starting to get them to notice something they might not have otherwise picked up on. So that I'm really passionate about that topic, and I've certainly found your insights really valuable around that, Matthew. So thank you for sharing those thoughts about empowerment and
That's great.
about. I know I could hear there was a lot deeper we could have gone into culture change, but thank you for starting the conversation about culture change. That was great too, and we'll finish there for today. But I just want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for being such an open book and telling your story, and going from banking and that fantastic story of the shutting down a floor. That was just a real highlight, because I think we've all got. That's what I enjoy about doing these sort of conversations, is the human aspect of leaders, and that's just a really gold story. But it's been a pleasure getting your insights as well. I think there was some really rich thoughts about empowering people, about high performance teams, about how to actually let go and focus on growing people, and also the story you shared about, I think it was Tom, yeah, and I really enjoyed that, and how you focused on caring for people, and what that means to actually care more about them, and wanting someone to be happy somewhere else rather than miserable working for you. That line probably stands out even the most from our conversation today. So thank you so much for coming on as a guest.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And that's the end of another episode of Leadership Conversations podcast. Make sure you look out for more episodes that'll be coming soon. And as always, it's really helpful for us to be able to invest in more leaders. If you can follow, subscribe, like, share wherever you're listening to this, that helps us to get the word out so we can invest in more leaders to become the very best they can be. I'll talk to you all next time.
Well, I hope today's leadership question has helped you in your leadership and put a stone in your shoe. That's what I love to say, is that my role, I believe, working with leaders is about putting a stone in your shoe. So something you were really comfortable with, now you're walking a little bit uncomfortably, going, is there a better way to do this? How do I handle this? And that's because no growth is comfortable. So I hope that's okay. I appreciate you taking the time. I don't take it lightly. And if you are just joining us, then make sure you check out our website, consultclarity.org, consultclarity.org. We have so much free content on there for you, including the 7 Questions on Leadership series. So more than 1,500 leaders around the world, different roles, different sectors, have filled out the 7 Questions on Leadership. In-depth answers on how they lead, what they've found most challenging, how they structure their time, what book or books have been most significant for them. There is so much gold on there. You could go and basically live in that part of our website for a few weeks, I think. So make sure you go and check that out. It's free. And hey, we would love to interview you for our 7 Questions on Leadership series. Your leadership, based on your context, your life, and your experience, I believe that you can bring something that other leaders can learn from. I truly do. And so it's completely free to get involved. It's a great way to give back if you're loving this content. And you can do that by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest, and then click on the page, fill out the form to express your interest, and we can get you going to fill out the 7 questions on leadership. We also have a free resource on our website. It's right at the top, consultclarity.org, on our homepage, and it's called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook with interviews from 10 world-class leaders, and it's right there for you to download. It's completely free, and awesome resource. It's very popular, so check that out. We also have a daily email, and I know that our more than 15,000 leaders who subscribe get a lot of value from that. We highlight the best content from our blogs, from our podcasts, from our books and books we're reading. It also gives you exclusive and limited access and early access to our masterclasses and workshops. So I really try to make it something as helpful and as valuable as possible. That's my commitment. And so go to consultclarity.org/subscribe if you're interested in all things leadership, and you can become part of that community. Now, my gift to you with everything we're doing, particularly with this podcast, the Leadership Question of the Day, is to work really hard to provide the best leadership content to invest in you and your leadership. Your gift to me would be this. If you're finding this helpful, if this helps you in your leadership, then there is something you can do that makes a massive difference, and that is to write a review or rate our content. Wherever you're listening or watching, rate our content, write a review, make sure you subscribe or follow. It might seem small to you to do that, but it adds up and it helps us to help more leaders become the best they can be. It also means a lot to me personally whenever I see you sharing our content. So thank you so much for that. If you do share it on social media, then look for me, John O. White, and try to tag me and look for clarity and tag us. And I promise we are always looking for content shared by our community. When people share our content, we're looking to engage with you. And there's also a chance that we may actually share what you write as a post with our followers. So if you do that, there's a chance you'll be shared as well. Last of all, you can check out my book called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because more than 50% of the leaders I coach, 50% of the sessions, where I coach leaders, this comes up again and again and again. And it's leaders saying, Jono, how do I deal with this difficult person? Or how do I deal with this person and I'm finding it so difficult, we're just on a different wavelength. And that's because difficult conversations are difficult. And I find this is one of the biggest challenges for leaders in the world today. And that's where Step Up or Step Out is a 3-step process to help you deal well with difficult people. I really believe it's a book that can help you in your leadership. So go and check that out. It's on Amazon, Step Up or Step Out, John O. White, if you just look that up, or go to store.consultclarity.org/book and you can get it there. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode of the Leadership Question of the Day next time. I hope today has helped you take another step towards becoming everything you're meant to be. We'll see you next time.